I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order. If you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Josh, can you do the roll call for us?
Yes, sir. Rachel Arizmendi.
Present.
Ashley Bourne.
Here.
Don Bransford. Here. Don Cameron. Here. Nancy Cassidy. Here. Helene Dillard. Mike Gallo. Here. Crystal Haling. Here. Eric Holst. Jeff Huckabee. Bryce Lundberg. Yes. Martha Montoya. Joyce Sterling. Yes. Andy Thulin. Present. Chris Valadez. Here. Thank you. Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Josh. At this time, we'd like to get approval for the minutes from the May 7th meeting. Second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Madam Secretary, you are up for the departmental report.
So the most important update is I took a vacation. That was a long time promise to Barry Ross, and it was great. It's always good to go taste food and wine. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. But May was a busy month. We released the May Revise, and there are several highlights in that, including some additional funding for our Animal Health Division. What we're seeing with our virulent Newcastle's disease is we need to have bodies embedded with this community, so prevalent backyard kind of livestock issues, and being able to be in a more proactive position with that. That will also give us the staff that we need for emergency response in wildfires and other kinds of things. We were just really strained, and so I'm very grateful to Governor Newsom for listening to that and working on that. We still have a few items that are outstanding, including what the final numbers will be for the Citrus Health Program. Unfortunately, every Friday brings a new email of how many more trees with Wong Long Bing that we have, including a couple of weeks ago in Riverside County, so we'll continue to work on that. We also have a biodiversity funding request in that has not yet been closed out. This follows up from the previous administration. CDFA and the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Office of Planning and Research worked with a group of botanists and ecologists, people who are all about plants and bugs. It was a very fun, enthusiastic group to work with, and it was a year-long process with Governor Brown really pushing us to come up with an initiative. Chuck Bonham and I have had a chance to brief Secretary Crowfoot on that, and really looking at how we integrate that into all the other things that we're doing, but as part of natural working landscapes, and really helping our urban public in particular really appreciate what these working landscapes can bring as far as public benefits, in addition to the great food and fiber that we harvest from those lands. We also have, as part of the May Revise, a very modest increase for our inspection services for food safety. And these are really following the pattern of what we've done on our climate smart agriculture, with additional positions that are out providing technical assistance on what is climate smart agriculture and assisting people in applying for those programs and knowing about those incentive programs. We just felt that with the work that we have been doing for the last 2 years, with the cooperative agreement and the funding that comes with that from Food and Drug Administration, farmers are so overwhelmed. They don't know if they're going to a SIGMA meeting, an Irrigated Ag Lands meeting, or a Food Safety Modernization Act meeting. And I've been trained by my previous boss to not use FSMA, ILRP, and SIGMA, and I just spelled it all out for you. And we saw real merit in getting some additional cooperative extension staff people in the field that are just doing education. This is based on what we were seeing from the on-farm readiness audits, that there's a lot more time that needs to be spent with the farm community to know what we're doing and why, because this is a real shift from not just responding to proactively preventing and doing more hazard type analysis. So we think it was a very worthwhile and that we can leverage that with upcoming additional cooperative agreements and funding from Food and Drug Administration. We had an interesting situation. You know, for over 25 years now, we have been flying over the LA basin to release sterile medflies. That's a significant change and a continuum of using best available science and working with all of our science community and academics to come up with this program. And it requires that we have 24/7 fly breeding happening in our plant in Hawaii. They're shipped, the pupa are shipped in these little plastic bags, and they come to Los Alamitos, which is not an active military plant, but the National Guard is very present there. We needed that flyway so that we can put planes up every day of the year, every day of the year. With budget cutbacks between USDA and us, we'd have successfully used, like, we go over rows and we'll skip, but we've still been very successful with that sterile fly technology. Well, the planes had to stop flying for a little while because some of the lighting had gone out and we needed to update it. And it's not like it's a high priority for the Defense Department. So once again, the National Guard continually amazes me with how they step up to be of service every day, not just in the bad times. And so I called General Baldwin and asked for his assistance to try to move this up on the priority list. I'll buy the light bulbs. We'll send the people down to put the lights in. He was on it immediately, and it wasn't 2 or 3 weeks. It was done immediately, and we're back up, and everything's certified to continue that. So that's just the great kinds of partnerships that we have across this administration. We did, at the beginning of the month, Governor Newsom, having just been elected, and Governor Brown was out of state, and he was the acting governor to declare the state of emergency for Paradise, and then traveled with Governor Brown and the president there. He has been very focused on emergency response and making sure that people are prepared. And so we spent a 5-hour session with all of the secretaries were there, of really walking through what it is for continuity of government, all those things that's easy for the public to just go, I guess it just happens, and there are people who dedicate their lives to that. It was a great session, and it was a great opportunity to watch my colleagues who hadn't been through this, and they're new, to go, oh, is this happening? It's like, it was a great opportunity, and Governor Newsom is really showing strong leadership in those efforts. I know the counties and cities yesterday hosted a day-long event on Are You Prepared for Emergency? So those are the kinds of things that are going on. Hemp regulations for registration were released in May. Mr. Chairman, welcome. Very nice to have you here. Generating a lot of questions, a lot of enthusiasm, and a lot of confusion. We are stuck in this kind of uncertain time where we need to have the federal government at USDA finish their regulations. They originally projected they would not have those done at all in 2019. They are now projecting they should have them done by September. We also have out a draft of our testing and sampling regs that went out for draft just last week, their emergency, just to help us get this program stood up at the state level. But a lot of counties are taking very different positions, and so there's just a lot of confusion on that. And then one of the things we did at the first of the month, and I know that everyone here is aware of it, there was a decision based on some of the work that had happened starting 2 years ago of sending a product, chlorpyrifos is the active product. It's an organophosphate. It's had increasing mitigation measures put on its use. It's a restricted use pesticide. And the significant changes in mitigation measures for any use starting in 2019. It went through a toxic air contaminant review at the Air Board, and based on some of the decisions and conclusions that were done there, the administration announced at the first part of May that we will start the cancellation process for use of that product in the state of California. That will take some time to do it. There's a lot of administrative processes to go through, including the Administrative Procedures Act. And the governor was really listening to what are the impacts of this, how is it used? We know that use has declined significantly, but it's still one of those tools in the toolbox that when you need to knock down a population, it has proven to be very effective. And so in addition to going through this 2-year, which we felt was the most, the due process way of doing this, we also announced, as part of the May revise, additional one-time spending for the Department of Pesticide Regulation for their Pesticide Alternatives Program, additional funding to CDFA for a program that we were just awarded a year ago for investments in proactive biocontrol as well as IR4 support for registering products for specialty crops. In addition to a work group that will start July 1, that alternatives work group is going to have a lot of technical, scientific work to go through, and how we proceed on this chlorpyrifos will probably set a tone for a lot of other things. But we also, as part of this, the governor wanted to be as proactive as possible. There was a great program that hasn't been funded for 15 years. It was called the Biologically Integrated Farming Systems at UC. And in fact, one of the very first grants it ever gave 15 years ago was to the Central Coast Vineyard team, which over a 2-year period of time reduced the use of chlorpyrifos to almost zero. And you think about what if we kept funding programs like that. We'd like to see more funding in the IPM program. This BIFS program will be housed at CDFA for the time being. This is all one-time funding, but we'll see what kind of successes we can generate doing these kinds of programs to really support the ag community as we go through a big change like this one. And with that, other than we did hold last week our very first California International Affairs and Trade Interagency Committee, which is chaired by the Lieutenant Governor, who's showing tremendous leadership in that capacity. Her vice chair is Lenny Mendonça, who's the governor's senior advisor for economics and business. Josh has been deeply engaged. There's been a lot more staff meetings than there were this, but this was a public meeting, and it was very informative what all the different agencies have been doing and will continue to do in this realm of international affairs and trade. I think the state board, Josh, has a letter for consideration today. So I think we can anticipate a very active role in those discussions by Governor Newsom's administration, and it's great to have the lieutenant governor leading that effort. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Okay, no questions?
Well, yes.
Go ahead, Bryce.
Pyrifos. That was one of the original BIFS grants that were given. I think walnuts were one of the very first programs. Central Coast Vineyard team, Lodi Woodbridge wine grape growers used theirs to start their Lodi rules. There was one for apples and tree fruit at the time, and then just, we all know what's happened. President of the President's Advisory Council for UC funding, in particular for ag and natural resources, and BIFS was one of those programs that at the time was run by the Sustainable Ag group. And so it was the Central Coast Vineyard team was the one, yeah. And so there have been some good successes. And I will say those were modest. You know, they were like $200,000 a year for 3 years. But they had big impact. And so I think there's lessons to be learned there. We'll try to capture them.
Secretary Ross, the Newcastle's
Yes.
disease, are there implications for the cat growers who would be utilizing
No, it's a living, the virus needs a living host to survive. And if you're using composted products because of the treatment, the temperatures, there should not be an issue, and we're not aware of one. But yeah, so that can really slow down that that byproduct stream coming into that business. This is a very stressful program for our staff, and not to be surprised by the longer the program goes and the broader the geographic region that it covers, the pushback on this. And we all know that people get very concerned when government's going door to door. We experience it every day with the Asian citrus psyllid, and making sure that there's really robust communications and outreach and assurances that we're from government and truly here to help is a hard message. And then when that could be your backyard flock, that it creates a lot of concern and anxiety and pushback, and we are seeing that. We have activated, in addition to additional USDA resources, the Office of Emergency Services has provided a lot of help with us on crisis management. We have had more appeals for the work that we've had to do, and we've had active engagement by CHP on some protest issues where there were real situations created that were potential public safety issues for the protesters, many of them who brought young children to it, in addition to our staff. So it's been a challenging situation. We're a year into this program, but I will say the epi curve of positive finds is going down, and the testing, and we're doing thousands of samples, which without our labs, I don't know how we would do this, that are coming back negative. So all the curves are going in the right direction, but we have to stick with these programs, and they're very, very difficult programs. I think being able to put people in the communities, we have to rebuild trust. We have to do education so they're self-policing themselves, just as we do in the commercial sector, of what are the signs of disease, acting on it quickly and taking care of it, understanding the biosecurity measures we can take, not moving dirty equipment, all those kinds of things. We just need to spend 3 or 4 years of really being committed to working with those people and rebuilding the systems there.
Is there any way that you can think about working more closely with some of the community-based agencies that maybe already have trust?
Yes.
With some folks,
Yeah.
and that way,
We
kind of really building
do,
that
because
knowledge
we need to, because there is a lack of trust. So really recognized community leaders, and especially because of multi-languages is especially important. And from day one, in the communities where we are, showing up on Sunday at every Mass and being there with coffee and cookies and an information booth has been one of the most effective tools. So we're constantly looking for that. We've added an additional resources to our public affairs with Spanish expertise, but as we know, California is blessed with a diversity of languages, and that still continues to be a challenge. Once again, I'm not plugging everyone to go out and sign up for the National Guard, but every language that is spoken in California, the National Guard has people who can assist us. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Thank you, Secretary Ross. I actually had a question about Newcastle, but Bryce brought that up already, and you've addressed my question. I just wanted to share and comment that a few months ago when we were talking about Newcastle, and I shared we're not hearing anything about it in Southern California, probably within the last month, there's gotten a lot of local coverage, but a lot of it was in terms of the protesters. So it's great to hear about the efforts you're having with crisis management and on the public affairs side, but it's definitely getting a lot of attention, more so than I've seen in,
The
in
whole
the last year.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Appreciate the feedback. Don.
Loaded question.
Oh, goody, I'm going to duck now.
With the 2-year phase out of chlorpyrifos and the process that's being developed, one of the issues you have in ag is, as you lose a tool, it's a longer period where something comes on. And now with the apparent split at US EPA and Cal EPA, is that just going to prolong registration of these, of any new products that may come on the line? And then secondly, UC has now taken some action on Roundup. Where is the state on that? Because again, it has huge implications for ag.
Yeah. So there is Prop 65 activity on glyphosate. And that, I think, is already, don't quote me on this, and I'm speaking into a public microphone. Okay, so there is activity on that at OEHA. I believe it's already in legal challenge, if I recall correctly. It may be under review at DPR. Because many of these products, just because of the age of the products, they're coming up for that. And there are a number of other products. Chlorpyrifos has been under that kind of review for a number of years now. I think some of the most important things for this alternatives work group is really understanding what is in the pipeline, where is it in the potential registration process. Are there policies that we should be looking at the state level that would allow for any potential changes to maybe move some things up in priority because we are taking something out and there's a dearth of replacements or whatever it might be. And then there has to be a recognition that there's going to be a need potentially for more special local need, 24C, 18C, whatever those might be. And in the registration process itself, I'm not aware that at that level the EPA tensions are more around the bigger scale policy issues, the pesticide. We have great professional scientists in the programs at DPR, and they've got long-time working relationships with people that are their counterparts. So I'm not aware of any of that. But these are all questions we're going to have to grapple with. And that's why the work of the alternatives work group really is going to have to get into those kinds of technical, deep understandings of what processes are there and available and what is possible to really put together some good work plans going forward. Chris?
Yes, Secretary, as CDFA may have or does have an expanded advisory role input opportunity in the IR4 process. Do you see as part of CDFA's activity as a bridge that's also inclusive or that can be inclusive, say more directly of whether it's the PCA community and or the registrant community within the confines of CDFA, so that the message that is then moved from CDFA into the IR4, the more technical scope that's also including the registration community, does have at least the input, the valued input from producers, at least as it's coming from those that are boots on the ground in the PCA community?
Yeah. When we got that program last year, one of my hopes was that this would be a way for us to potentially leverage with commodity groups, because the IR4 program gets Farm Bill funding, and then if it's a commodity group that has funding for this kind of work, to do that hopefully we could leverage those kinds of dollars and get even more products through, which means we're going to have a lot of really close ongoing communications. Our authority is very limited once the Department of Pesticide Regulation moved from CDFA to EPA, but there was a very specific carve-out to be able to capitalize on our agronomic expertise. So providing agronomic alternatives, economic alternatives, analysis of different application methods. So we do have a technical advisory committee. And I think that with this significant, even though it's one-time funding, it's significant increase in dollars, there's a way for us to bring in additional PCAs are very important to all of this. When we look at the framework of how people get their information and who they depend on, in addition to registrants. So I would like to see more PCA and farmer engagement through that technical advisory committee.
I just want to add, I appreciate that. I remember going to US EPA to talk about rice farming, and we had gone to GPS, and they thought we were still waving flags in the
Yes.
field. And unless you have that representation, unless the regulators are invited out into the field, which some industries like to do, others prevent.
Yeah.
I personally believe the more they know, the better decisions they make. But it's very important to have that input because, they can give firsthand experiences and often educate the regulators as to what the cultural practices are today, not 10 years ago.
Exactly. Exactly. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Ross. Very informative update today. Thanks. Well, we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about water policy. Today, we have the pleasure of having the chair of the State Water Resources Control Board, Joaquin Esquivel, to join us today. Joaquin was appointed to the State Water Resources Control Board by Governor Jerry Brown in March of 2017 and designated by Governor Gavin Newsom as chair in February 2019. Previously, he served as Assistant Secretary for the Federal Water Policy at the California Natural Resource Agency in the Governor's Washington, D.C. offices, where he facilitated the development of policy priorities between the agency, the Governor's office, and the California Congressional Delegation and the federal stakeholder agencies. There you go. Joaquin, welcome, and good to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and to varying degrees of success on that last job description. I can talk about any number of issues today. I thought that first I would just kind of give you a general sort of introduction to myself. You heard sort of the official biography, but I did grow up in the Coachella Valley, Palm Springs area. Am the grandson of farm workers, migrant farm workers on my mother's side. I'm first generation, and my grandfather was a bracero and a palmero at Laughlin Day Gardens, now Oasis Day Gardens, there in Thermal in the Coachella Valley. And it was actually the kindness of Ben Laughlin that then led to the family being sponsored and coming to then the Coachella Valley. And on my father's side, I'm third generation, so the family first came to the U.S. fleeing the violence of the Mexican Revolution. There was a brother that didn't want to fight. He was hung, and so they thought it'd probably be best to leave at that point. But so successive waves of immigration, but with strong ties to agriculture. Insofar as on my father's side, my grandparents were migrant farm workers. Insofar as the families first met, half were in Buckeye, Arizona, then a lot of cotton, not so much. A lot more housing developments in Buckeye. It's interesting to see that sort of development. But then they'd get into the Coachella Valley, table grapes, go into the Central Valley, and end up following the harvest and ending in Gilroy for garlic. And that kind of was, and so half the family on that side is in Bakersfield and the other in Buckeye. But I say all that because it was a strong part of my identity. It was agriculture. It's incredibly unique in California, as you all know. And so when I was in D.C. and I had the pleasure of better getting to know ag through my work in Senator Boxer's office, where I handled the agricultural portfolio, and where Karen and I first met, and I met some of you then there. It was very unique, obviously, to represent California ag in D.C., where, as you all well know, commodity crops and the rest of the nation's ag sort of dominates the discussion. But to see a shift from 2008 Farm Bill and on, with a real emphasis and beginning emphasis on specialty crops, and acknowledgement within the Farm Bill that what we feed ourselves is critical and foundation to our health. And so how are we incentivizing the right things? And thankfully, California grows a number of the right things, insofar as being so blessed to have, the 400 commodities that you all well know. So I take that background, I take that to my position now as chair at the state board, and certainly these last 2 years serving on the state board, have always been mindful of the critical part of California's identity that agriculture is, and at the same time, the challenges that we face and the complexities of all that we have before us in climate change and otherwise. And water, obviously, is a space where there's obviously tremendous collaboration, but also tremendous tension. And, you look at California's water uses, you look at how it is that we're going to imagine ourselves as a state in 2050. Imagine how we're going to be managing our water resources successfully or otherwise. And, thankfully, we have a great history these past decades of real leadership on these thorny issues in California, and some continued tension. And so coming now into the position as chair with the update of the Water Quality Control Plan, the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, our work continuing on that, our decades-long work, I'd like to flag that I was, the last time the Water Quality Control Plan, Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan was significantly updated was 95. And, since then, these last 30 years, things haven't gotten better in the watershed. And so we do need to update the Water Quality Control Plan. We do need to figure out how we better manage this watershed that's 40% of the state. And it's not easy. It certainly won't be easy. But in 95, I was in the 8th grade. And so I know but I bring it out not to say, look how young he is, but because there are students now in the 8th grade who similarly in 20, 30 years will find themselves in needing, we'll see what they have. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to not sell ourselves short, to have hard conversations around how we manage our water in watersheds that are so vast and complex that it's not about just what you do or what your responsibilities are or what you are limited to, but what we are going to do and how we are going to solve these really challenging issues. And recognize that, no drop thinks they're responsible for the flood, but we all are that thing. And so we have a very mixed legacy. We have these incredible, in water, we have these incredible projects, this incredible development that's allowed for 40 million people to be part of the richest state and the richest nation in the world. And so we have some challenging times ahead of us. And so obviously, the Water Quality Control Plan is one of them and front and central, and we're very hopeful that through a process of voluntary agreements and the development therein, we can get to that better whole that I talked about that isn't just about what am I just going to do, but how do we collectively act on a greater scale to really tackle what do we need to keep in the watershed? What does an ecosystem need? That's really, it's of critical importance because our economies are based on those ecologies, and it's not the other way around. And so, whether it's the update of the Water Quality Control Plan or wetlands policy or toxicity perhaps, or the other things that the board will pursue in its regulatory authorities to get a better handle on water quality and to continue to protect and improve these water resources so that in 2050, there'll be a whole new set of issues to deal with. But at least for the plate that we've set collectively here for ourselves with this administration, with so many of the leaders that are here in the room that represent water interests in agriculture, I'm fortunate to be able to serve some time here as chair. We'll see, and I'm open to further discussion here, but didn't want to drone on too long because this is a public meeting, Secretary Ross, and who knows what I might say.
I do want to note, I forgot that we've already started the meetings for what was already alluded to.
Yes.
A month ago, the governor released an executive order directing EPA resources and CDFA to start the work on a water resiliency portfolio, which is really looking at 2050, where, really how do we anticipate what this world will look like and what do we need to start doing now? We're getting ready to announce this week there's going to be extensive public engagement and an opportunity for this board to be as active as they want to be in providing some of the forums for that. And obviously, the chair of the State Water Board is going to be deeply engaged in that, as well as everything else that's on his agenda. But I would also say that out of respect for the chair, There's a lot of questions that we have for him, but there's going to be certain things he cannot comment on. So I just want to remind us all of that, that he's just, I know, Don, I know you of all people didn't know that, right?
And,
So I
and
really
I
appreciate you
will-
being here.
I appreciate that, Secretary Ross, and I apologize. Yes, the executive order is really, it's an exciting opportunity. For us, I know, again, I alluded to all the great leadership that's already taken place in California, really, and for us, it's a synthesis of that and saying, how do we take documents like the California Water Action Plan, like, you just see everything that this state, we were all able to accomplish through the drought, whether it's SGMA, whether it's efficiency legislation, there is this incredible evolution in the way we've been able to talk about water in this state. And so how do we better capture that and say, the Water Action Plan from the previous administration was a list of really good things that we should be pursuing. But how do you get some metrics? How do you get some actual, we see the analog is in climate change or in energy, where you set targets, you measure, you set metrics, targets, and we meet them. We meet them as Californians. And so when we talk about regional resiliency on water, what does that look like? And it looks very different in the Coachella Valley than it does in the Salinas Valley, than it does in the San Gabriel Valley, than it does in the many valleys that encompass this state. And so it's an exciting adventure for us insofar as really listening first as well, because I think we all have in water, there's no silver bullet, silver buckshot, as we well know, and so there's a lot of really great work already. So how do we synthesize that? How do we make it into something knowable and achievable when we talk about water resiliency? And so we're really excited to be engaged with that with our counterparts, and as the Secretary said, looking for these venues to tap the incredible leadership and expertise that we know is already out there in the state around these issues. So more to come on the EO very soon. And so thank you. And when it comes to certain questions, ask them, and I will be candid with you if I can't. And then otherwise, I may get myself in trouble by trying to go ahead and answer things. So thank you.
Yes, go ahead, Joy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is a very exciting and incredibly important and a decisive moment for the state and the country. You mentioned setting metrics, and of course that implies measurement. So I'd be curious to know your thoughts on how we're going to measure water use.
Yeah, this is actually the first year, and this is actually kind of a scary note, but this is the first year that all water rights holders have had to report their last year's consumption. This is the first year that's happened in California, which, to your point, when it comes to water use and consumption, it gets complicated. It is not an easy thing. For example, we can talk about measuring diversions in the Delta and the use of siphon pumps, which are really hard. If you have a generator and you're pumping through a generator, and you can usually tell, okay, X gallons per minute, you're making your calculations. I ran it for this number of times. You can kind of get your water use if you're an irrigator. In the Delta, you can't. So water use and water use measurement can get very complicated and very difficult, but it's central to managing it. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And so on that note, one, good news, the first year, all water rights holders reported their last year's usage. That's a start. That's a good start for California. We'll start to have a better data set, and that'll have knock-on effects on how we administer water rights, and that's a benefit. How we measure, say, urban use, though, outdoor use, that's going to be addressed through efficiency legislation that's going through now. And so, I think that I mentioned those things because I think that there's a lot of good work that is kind of progressing on this space of better measuring. I know that there's a DOT bill currently to get better stream gauges in the environment where, we actually have fewer stream gauges now, so we know less about the flows in our rivers than we did 20, 30 years ago because of an attrition of stream gauges that USGS used to do a 50% cost share. We've been doing now like 70-20. So there's all these ways that I think we can, and I think this will be some of the work of the executive order, at least I see it in so far as what the executive order, means, or what this portfolio, approach means for us as an agency, but is identifying, how do you kind of bundle these things together so that they do get us better spatial information around water? What are the needs? Where are the deficits in information? What are the tools that we might be able to use that are more innovative and lower cost to get that data, as opposed to going to an irrigator and saying, spend X money on a meter for your pump. Maybe it's instead using satellite data to be able to tell the evapotranspirative rate on that land, so you know what their water usage is, because you can calculate that, which is something that Google and NASA are actually currently working on. So that's pretty neat. So I think, kind of stitching all those together can get us to that question of the better water data that we need and how we use it. And it's always kind of specific to, I guess, what you're using it for too.
I mean, this is going to make everybody at the table laugh when I bring up my passion project broadband.
There's no laughing. You have none of those tools without that infrastructure.
So, thank you. I just wanted to plant that seed. I'm amazed no one else came up and said, I can read Joy's mind. But I don't see how we can, as citizens and certainly as farmers, I don't see how we can measure water use without having the infrastructure.
Here. Well, and I think those opportunities where, how does the water board better collaborate then to get those resources, knowing that that's what facilitates better water management, or just better management in general. When we talk about the irrigated lands program for us, meeting water quality objectives, all these things, they require this 21st century backbone if we're all going to be 21st century innovators in the resource management. So here.
So I'm going to ask you one question before I pass it on to my friends here. But, looking ahead for agriculture, let's just pick a random year like 2040. What do you foresee agriculture position at that point? What changes do you see when you look at 20 years out in regard to water policy?
Yeah, it's gonna. Let's look 30 years, back, right? If we go the other way, just to see, how much has changed. Maybe not too much. Maybe we're still fighting around these same issues that are before the board. But I think not. I think that we are in a moment where we can get past some of the tensions around managing it and actually start managing it together. And so I have a hard time kind of imagining what it might be, only because I think it'll be so transformational. I don't think it'll be hard to quantify. But I think here are a few projects out there that I know that are happening that are maybe emblematic of what more we'll see. The water recycling projects that are happening in Modesto, then in Turlock, where you have then an ag need and an urban component, and this doesn't work everywhere because you don't have urban wastewater streams as well that you can look at holistically in that sort of watershed outlook. But you have then this synergy and this dependence and this relationship, which is already there, but in a real way when the water connects them between the cities and the urban water users and that agricultural community that is also then part of that cycle. And so if you connect then groundwater usage with that picture, you get some pretty neat collaborations, you get some pretty neat opportunities, and they're so hyper-local that I can't make them happen. And certainly most people won't even listen to me, which is fine, they don't need to, and don't want the state board to come in and say, thou shalt. And it is far better, and we know more durable for the leadership themselves to say, it's not that we did it because thou shalt, we did it because this is the community we want to see in that 20, 30 years. And so ag being so different everywhere in the state, I think it's hard to say, okay, well, what does it look like everywhere? But I think there are more stories like that. And I think, you see, acknowledgements of that interrelationship and that need to acknowledge our interdependence. And even in real, not great fights right now, like say down in Imperial, around where growers, that cell of water to San Diego is still in, the craw of that ag community, and will be, and it's because of a feeling like they had no choice. And so how do we get people to see those opportunities as maybe collaboration and not, again, it's because we had to. And and it's because we do. But it's not because the government's coming in and being a bully. It's because the climate is changing, and all of our systems are going to crumble beneath us lest we kind of get our act together. So, by hook or crook. So,
We are doing one of those on farm currently, so.
fantastic.
Don, I think you were next.
You're the chair. Joaquin, thanks for your comments. I really appreciate the "we are responsible" comments. I truly believe that. Getting to "we" is the big issue. And I think for the first time with the structure in the VAs, I think this administration is giving people a comfort level that we are getting to "we." But I just want to emphasize the importance of leadership from the board members, because I think historically it's been the staff that leads and the board follows, and it's so important that not just your board but other boards provide that leadership. And I don't say that to be critical of staff, but staff has a mindset which is very risk averse. It's very difficult for them to take risk, but we're moving into a process where everyone's going to take a risk, and there are no right answers to this. And if we can get to we can at least make a best guess to move forward. Then we'll measure it and make another best guess. But the only way we're going to move the dial down the road is we. Otherwise, we end up litigating, and look what's happened. I mean, it continues to go down. So I mean, we look forward to working with you, and I think there's, at least in our camp, there's optimism that we're going to be able to move this forward.
I appreciate that. Yeah, you look at the last time the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan was updated in '95, and the discussions then, how when, it was still like, well, let's do, VAMP, right? Yeah, VAMP, the Vernalis Adaptive Management Program, which was, we'll send a little water down, we'll do a lot more testing, and we'll try to figure things out. I think we know a lot. So I agree with everything you said, but except for your mixed metaphor, where you said we're going to turn the dial down the road. I think you said, and we're not going to kick the can down the road. I know. I think it's like you wanted to say we're going to advance the dial. Like
No,
we're going to advance the dial.
I did not mean at all turn the dial down. I meant measure and evaluate that measurement, and then you make a new decision as to what needs to be done. I'm not.
Sure. Yeah, I guess
do
it was
not
the
believe
down
we're
the
ever
road.
going back.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate that. Not to quibble with your mixed metaphor, but it was just. I guess for me, it's we know a lot, so let's not also then say, wow, we need to study a lot more before we can make determinations on things. I think that we just need to be honest with ourselves, start setting, anyway, we've always had trouble with amounts of water. And, we have a very squishy system to our data discussion. And it's like, how do we get better about actually managing that system in real time and being honest about what the ecosystem needs? Because again, that is the foundation under which all of our other activities happen. So, but I appreciate it. And I appreciate your leadership and continued work and discussion and all that. I know, and to your point, yeah, it's a Herculean effort right now that the administration, we're all part of, and having an honest assessment with ourselves. And that as a state, again, more than anything. And we can't sell ourselves short in that moment. It's too important.
Thank you. Thank you, Don. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your comments, particularly as it relates to understanding, I think, the background of agriculture, having roots in an agricultural region, and understanding now from the regulatory perspective that typically representing the producer community, which I do, transitioning from the San Joaquin Valley over now into the Central Coast, typically speaking, no one is looking or desiring for the state water board to come in and tell people what to do and how to do it and why it should be done a specific way. Spot on there with the obvious. However, a concern that I'm now realizing and am now actively living is, what can or what may likely happen as a result of, maybe an impasse or sticking points that might be created or that are happening because of maybe disconnect or differences of opinion and no or maybe not enough filling of attention from maybe Sacramento or the state board into issues and developments within a region like the Central Coast. And so what I'm hearing and seeing from the producer community is, I think, a genuine interest to continue to lead and create a model where it relates to, being the solution on providing drinking water in other areas, but in other ways where they have and continue to develop the agronomic data and the validity to what the ultimate or final solution is going to be in their transition as agriculture into a solution which is sustainable and then results oriented, where you can measure and manage what you can measure. There seems to be a feeling or a desire, or at least a hope, that as the dialogue and the process continues between the producer community and the regulatory community in a more regional scope, that they're on a parallel track is also an opportunity to reach out and have a direct and inclusive dialogue with the state board, so that, unlike now going backwards for me, from my experience in the San Joaquin Valley, we don't have to wait to get to that point where the sides are going to be just too far apart and you have to petition the state board. And it just takes more time, more money, more resources to get to what ends up being a solution that hopefully you could have mitigated a lot of problems, or hopefully some issues earlier on, so that it doesn't take as long to get to the point of implementing what is a reasonable and workable solution for both the regulatory community to track and measure, but also the producer community to actually implement. And so for me, I agree with you, but there's a but. And as I'm seeing it now on the Central Coast, it's more of a desire to have a parallel conversation, particularly with folks where appropriate on the state board, so that we're guiding, we're nurturing, and we're trying to avert these sideways or likelihood risk for getting sideways, and so that at the end of the day, the solution isn't delayed. We're not having to get to the point of last resort in a petition and then work backwards, as opposed to working smartly up front.
I appreciate that. And instead of but, how about and? And so I think for sure, if you kind of look at the history of the boards over the last kind of decades, there was a time when the board really depended on petitions to set their precedent for their programs across the state. That's really shifted. I mean, it really shifted with Felicia as well, but prior boards really did start moving more toward, well, we'll just set statewide policy at the front. Or once enough, regional programs are kind of cooking out there and we can kind of do so, bring in. And so, yeah, on the Eastern San Joaquin order, it was a long process, and it wasn't the ideal one insofar as, wouldn't it be better if, it didn't really take that moment for the board to have to step in. And I think that you'll find that I and my fellow board members are interested in engaging at that appropriate level, but also respecting very much that our regional boards are they have their own chair, they have their own boards, they have their own EOs, they're quasi-independent. And we kind of depend upon that as well to keep a little space. But, I always and will continue to, I've made a point actually of better coordinating with my regional chairs, taking on the monthly chairs call, really better developing that relationship, because it is really critical to us. There are little incubator laboratories that are also having to do the day in, day out implementation of the permits and regulatory policies that we set the state frameworks for, and we want to see it working. And we know right now in irrigated lands there is there is a split between the way the programs really are in Region 3 and Region 5, and what does it mean, and whose is better? Is it, the co-op model? Is it the direct, regulatory relationship? Maybe different regions need to have different sort of approaches because it's just a different animal, but we're here to be flexible and continue to adjust, and for us, be very outcomes-based, to your point, about the measurements, about the actual outcomes at the far, and not the far end, but at the, as the end product. And you'll find that, there's many ways to get maybe to those outcomes, and if we're getting there, that's what I care about most, so.
I don't have a poem today. Thank you for taking the role and leadership in this position, Joaquin, and congratulations. And I do want to just recognize Felicia in her role, how she so well took us through drought, and we'll be in drought again, emergencies, and we'll be in emergencies again, and how she spent time in the field visiting with us. And Joaquin, you have already started doing that, getting out of Sacramento and visiting in the communities that have all the different issues. And thank you for that, and I commend you for that, and please continue to be out in the communities and listening to us. I was, right after I got on the board, Governor Brown came to see us, and one of the questions I asked Governor Brown was, Governor Brown, how is it that the State Water Board can supersede many of your policies on water or goals with water? And Governor Brown turned to Dan Dooley and said, Dan, is that true? And Dan said,
I don't think we were superseding in the last administration. Anyway.
yeah, he said, Dan, the State Water Board has a lot of autonomy and independence. And I was wondering, Joaquin, if you could speak to maybe a little bit more of what Don had said as far as in having a water policy for the state that has a role for the governor and the administration, for the legislature, for the water drinkers and the water irrigators, in a role that the State Water Board has that is independent and autonomous. I really appreciate the opportunity to have coordinated discussions and cooperation with the State Water Board. How do you see bringing people from various interests and different parts of the government together through the State Water Board to have a water action plan or a water resiliency plan that can have direction from administration and people, but has to also be compatible with the work of the State Water Board?
Yeah, I think those things are extremely compatible. And I really appreciate, Bryce, your acknowledgement of Felicia. It was something that I was remiss to do insofar as, the board that she inherited in 2013, is not the board I'm inheriting now in 2019. And it's because a tremendous amount of leadership from Felicia through the drought, through the bringing over the Division of Drinking Water, which, I argue has made us into, the first real modern water regulatory agency in the nation, insofar as other states aren't fortunate to have something that cuts silos on water rights, water quality, and drinking water. So protecting water quality and headwaters through rivers, out onto farms, into cities, through people's taps, out their toilets, to the wastewater facilities, and discharge back into those environments. That it is a great responsibility, and it is what makes the board unique. It makes the board unique, and we have Felicia's leadership and also the leadership of many in the state, though, in the legislature and the previous governor, in making that the fact that, again, this board is very different. So we're not an island. The board doesn't exist without the state, and so I know it can maybe there's a narrative out there that the board was unruly or maybe even crossed the last administration, but as someone that very intimately was in the administration, was at some very difficult conversations last year, the board actually always was very coordinated with the administration and the desires of the state writ large. And so I think, yeah, we are here, and, you know, through their EO process, we'll be able to have a really great discussion with our sister agencies about how we accomplish common goals. You know, when we talk about water, we have, you know, over 7,000 agencies that provide water in the state, drinking water, let alone irrigation districts, let alone all the other entities responsible. And so it's going to require all of us to say, how do we have a common framework and metrics, and what do we all need to do in order to really advance that water resiliency for ag, for our cities, for everybody, and balance those out where there will be obvious tensions. For example, on the LA River in Los Angeles, you have a lot of interest from the urban sector to recycle a lot more of its water, which then means you have less discharges to the LA River, which is an effluent-dominated river. And you might think, oh, that's gross, but the water meets all standards. You know, it is clean. It's not. It doesn't harm you to recreate in it, and it flows down then the LA River and provides these benefits. So how do you balance those two things? What is protective in that case for those needs, and how much do you maybe need to leave? So there are all these real terrible complexities around water, and we're here at the State Board to acknowledge those and be partners. So, you know, you will find, I look forward to continuing to build that trust and that faith, if that isn't the sense or isn't the narrative, but really appreciate your continued leadership as well. And again, thank you for acknowledging the previous chair. So.
Statement for another meeting. Joaquin, one other issue I'd like to bring up for another meeting, and that would be transparency within the State Board of fee structures.
Sure, yeah.
We've had a lot of
By all
difficulty
means.
figuring out.
Really?
And understanding how you set your fees, and if we could agendize that, or at least put it on the table for a future meeting,
I
that would be
appreciate
wonderful.
that. I mean, we discuss fees yearly. And so as someone now who's been now through 2 cycles of fee discussions with many stakeholders in the room, I'm surprised I haven't seen you there. So you should be arriving, and you may have been there, Don. So I don't mean to, you have not, okay. Well, let's cut through that mystery. Let's definitely cut through that mystery, because as I'm sure you all know, we're a fee-based organization, so we have the unenviable task of going to the regulated entities that we regulate and say, pay us money to regulate you, and maybe even sometimes pay us a little more so we regulate you more smartly, and it doesn't usually go over that way, it's usually. But we are here to justify. There is, well, that's a specific issue, yeah. I've talked to Tim Johnson a lot about that, and that's separate than, fees get very complicated. I will just say as well, I know we're late at this point, but closing comment on fees for folks. You know, you look at, there was a recent report, right, of cost of compliance and fees, et cetera, on ag and the burden, and our water quality fees are pretty minimal when you look at that pie chart. But more importantly, I think what folks are really talking about is cost of compliance, which can be a lot more. That is where it can get very expensive for growers. And so as much as I know you want to have a conversation on fees, I would say, yes, let's have a conversation on fees. We want to be transparent and we want to show you, but I think it's really cost compliance you want to talk about more. And I'm willing to have a conversation there as well, knowing that that's maybe the heart of it more, as opposed to that fee discussion. It's a yearly one, and it's not like we're overfunded. So I appreciate it.
Great lead. And I was going to say, for the temporary flood permits, you ought to be incentivizing the growers to take that water rather than charging them for it because of the flood protection downstream that you're getting. But I won't go there.
They are very low rates, and nobody, when they were
How-
even lower, nobody was taking advantage of the program. So people really need to take advantage of that program. Thank you.
But I really, Chairman Esquivel, I'd like to thank you for coming. And I hope that you're not a stranger here. The door is open, the invitation stands, I'm sure.
I appreciate
The
that.
Secretary, we'd love to see more of you and get a better dialogue and have the board participate in some of the work you do. We'd love to do that, so.
Would love to do a deep dive on fees maybe, but maybe more on like groundwater recharge, to your point, or, how we're seeing anything, whether it's Sigma, or I know there's, on groundwater and Sigma and recharge, there's this interest that beneficial use needs to be attached to groundwater recharge. And we put out a recent white paper. Would love for maybe staff to come and talk to you about how we've identified within our existing authorities, we can actually permit any project that's come to us for groundwater recharge without having to change structure to beneficial use, but things like that.
No, I agree. We figured a way around it as well, so.
Yeah, but it would be great to maybe identify some of those items that would be important to the board here. And I would love to come back with staff and have deeper dives.
Excellent. Well,
Let's make
thank
a
you
point.
again. Really
Thank
a
you.
pleasure to have you here.
Thank you all.
Well, this time we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to talk about navel orangeworm in almonds and other tree nuts. It's my pleasure to introduce Michael Kelly. Michael is with the Central California Almond Growers Association. He's the president and CEO of Central California Almond Growers, the largest huller and sheller of almonds in the world. Mr. Kelly is also current chairman of the Western Ag Processors Association, who represents shellers and processors on legislative and regulatory affairs affecting almonds, pistachios, walnuts, and pecans in California. He also serves on the Tree Nut Industry's Navel Orangeworm Action Committee. And I've known Mike for a long time, from back in the cotton days when we both had dark hair. So I'll leave it at that. Mike, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Don. Also, it's a pleasure, Secretary Ross, to see you again, and it's a real pleasure to be here, to be speaking in front of this board. My name is Michael Kelly. It is a pleasure and indeed an honor for me to speak with you today about the tree nut industry in California, which is collectively pursuing a novel approach using a sterile insect technology to combat an invasive pest that has been a problem in our state for some time. The targeted pest is one whose economic impact is mounting and whose resistance to standard pesticides seems to be increasing. Resistance occurs when a population of a targeted insect becomes tolerant of a pesticide due to overapplication, which makes the chemical ineffective in controlling the pest. This sterile insect technology that is being tested is not new and has worked successfully before. It is a hope that it may, in the future, help to significantly suppress one of the biggest challenges the tree nut industry faces in addressing navel orangeworm, and thereby causing less pesticides being utilized in controlling this pest. This invasive species is the most destructive pest of almonds, pistachios, and walnuts. These three tree nut commodities collectively have a combined U.S. farm gate value of more than $12 billion, and together lose as much as $800 million each year to damage directly attributable to navel orangeworm. There is hope that this technology may be used to suppress the effects of this costly pest in the future. Today, I am speaking with you as a member of the Navel Orangeworm Action Committee, but also in my capacity as President and CEO of Central California Almond Growers Association. Our association is the largest almond huller and sheller of almonds in the world, and we're located on 2 sites in Fresno County. We operate as an agricultural service cooperative and currently have a membership of 400 almond farmers who bring their annual production to our 2 locations for the processing of their almond production each year. Last fall, we saw heavy levels of navel orangeworm damage delivered from the field to us. Yields were down due to 2 freeze events that took place during pollination in February of 2018. This decrease in almonds allowed navel orangeworm to emerge in our area with a lesser number of almonds on the trees, leading to more significant damage. Less almonds, more opportunities for infestation. Insecticide applications for now, and I'm going to use the acronym now if you don't mind, were extensive, ranging from 3 to 5 applications per field, in what normally would be 2 to 3. It seemed apparent that applications were less than effective and suggests some of our standard chemistries are showing resistance. There is also the possibility that warmer summers over the last few years have allowed more generations of navel orangeworm to be produced each season, further affecting the potential quality of the state's tree nut crop. On behalf of our membership and California tree nut growers, this scares me and reminds me of a moment in time 30 years ago when I was a young cotton farmer in the Imperial Valley of California. At that time, the evasive pest was the pink bollworm, and it raised havoc, not only on my farm, but across the entire desert Southwest, from the lower Rio Grande River region of Texas to the lower river region, Colorado River region of California. I began farming cotton near Calipatria, California in 1977 with the help of my father, and grew cotton sporadically up until 1987. During this period, the efficacy of insecticides was faltering. We were overspraying in an attempt to get control of pink bollworm. In the middle of the summer, we were having to spray every 7 days for pinky, as resistance to each innovative chemistry in successive years was building. This also caused us to lose our beneficial insects, which meant we had to spray more for other pests like late season aphids, ligas, and tobacco budworm. During the middle of the summer of 1987, I came to the realization that the insects were winning. I was offered a position as a gen manager with Producers Cotton Oil Company, where I served in that capacity for 5 years in Arizona and California. I never grew cotton again. The pink bollworm never got a foothold in the San Joaquin Valley. Beginning in 1970, sterile pink bollworm moths that had been reared at a facility in Phoenix were released in the San Joaquin Valley. Traps were set up along the southern end of the San Joaquin and in the high desert to capture moths and allowing a count of the number of pinky making it over the high desert and mountains to our south. The focus, while controversial at the time, was to suppress pinky in order to take the pressure off standard chemistries available at the time. Many believe there was no possible way that sterile release program of irradiated moths that would be flown many miles via commercial aircraft and then dropped from a smaller aircraft flying at an altitude of a few hundred feet would work. However, some innovative farmers saw the sterile insect technology as the only alternative. They hoped for relief from this costly pest, and they had a great belief that pursuing this sterile insect technology could suppress pinky. In February of 2017, the California Department of Pesticide Regulation honored the pink bollworm program for its efforts in managing pests while reducing the use of pesticides. And CDFA has a big thanks that we need to bestow on them for the help that they've given over the years with regards to this program as well. Last fall, the pink bollworm was officially eradicated. Due to eradication, the rearing facility in Phoenix is slated to be closed, and the program ended. This is because the pink bollworm program was promulgated by legislation that specifically targeted pinky and not any other insect pest. Several years ago, several farmers involved with the California Cotton Pest Control Board, who are also almond growers, wondered if the sterile insect technology used in the eradication of the pink bollworm could also be utilized to suppress and maybe, just maybe, someday lead to eradication of the navel orangeworm. I currently serve as the proud member of the Navel Orangeworm Action Committee that was created last fall to spearhead an effort to suppress the effects of navel orangeworm by releasing sterile moths within the tree nut producing counties of California. The program is being modeled after the pink bollworm program. A technical advisory committee, also known as TAC, conducts research and makes recommendations to a grower and industry-run body known as the Navel Orange Action Committee, or NOAC. The NOAC committee will implement directives agreed upon by the members of the committee based on consensus and monetary constraints. As mentioned earlier, the cost to our industry due to navel orangeworm is $800 million. To put this in perspective, losses incurred by cotton producers due to pinky at the end of the 1990s was approaching $21 billion. Further adding to the cost, navel orangeworm is also a major vector for aflatoxin, which results in rejections of shipments in numerous export ports, hurting our trade position. Aflatoxin is a mold that in large quantities is poisonous to mammalian life forms. It is found at locations on the almond kernel that have been damaged by navel orangeworm. To ensure the industry is not vulnerable to the arbitrary application of inconsistent import controls at the port of entry, necessitated by incidents of aflatoxin, the Almond Board implements a pre-export check program recognized by the European Union. The cost to our industry is an estimated $5,250,000 per year just for sampling and analysis. This is significant investment that the industry makes to manage now associated with food safety risk. Each year, rejected overseas almond containers cost the industry $270,000 to return to the U.S. for reconditioning. Reflecting the significance of this pest, since the 1970s, the pistachio and the almond industries have funded over 130 research projects on control and more than 55 studies on aflatoxin. We see this sterile insect technique as a promising new tool to complement and enhance our integrated pest management system for tree nuts. This will add another bow in our quiver when fighting navel orangeworm with less impact on the environment. The tree nut industry would be in keeping with the current administration's desire for less impactful methods of controlling pests rather than using standard pesticides. We hear a public calling to think about how we address pest control differently, and we hope that this sterile insect technology may be a method of not only suppressing navel orangeworm, but perhaps other insect pressures in the future as well. Recently, through their grower-funded marketing orders, the pistachio and almond industries have invested $7 million for fiscal year 2019 for the Center for Plant Health Science and Technology Laboratory in Phoenix, Arizona, an APHIS-operated laboratory, which I might point out that this is a quasi-owned facility between CDFA and the cotton growers of California. The purpose of this lab is to test the application of sterile insect technology for navel orangeworm, and they've been doing that for the last 2 years. This facility previously produced sterile insects that contributed to the eradication of the cotton pink bollworm. Due to the overwhelming success of this eradication effort, the facility, as I've said, is threatened to be closed without funding for fiscal year 2020. As you know, the federal fiscal year 2020 begins on October 1st. If shut down, we will lose our investment in this promising technology. It is our hope that we will be able to gain support from all stakeholders in securing funding for the Phoenix USDA APHIS insect rearing facility to shift from the cotton pest control to navel orangeworm. We are currently seeking help from our congressional delegation and others in securing an appropriation of $21 million to USDA APHIS for the upcoming 2020 fiscal year as a co-investment with our industry in development of a novel, sterile, and technology for navel orangeworm. Doing so not only represents an investment in jobs, but additionally the positive trade balance our industries contribute to our rural and national economies. Most importantly, this is also an investment in non-chemical pest control tools for the benefit of our food system and environmental health. This is the essence of sustainability and complements our integrated pest management program that is the fabric of California's agricultural legacy. Time is of the essence. A markup occurred 12 days ago in the United States Congress House Appropriations Agricultural Subcommittee that addressed USDA APHIS funding. While it did not specifically earmark the $21 million needed for fiscal year 2020, we do have some hope that our effort will be included in the overall amount of $1.04 billion that was in the subcommittee's appropriation request for APHIS that was approved by the committee. and approved on May 16th. However, we may need further help, and we are manning the phones and writing letters to let our decision makers know of this important and compelling opportunity. After the implementation of BT technology in cotton to address lepidopteran pests, the National Cotton Council produced a document in August of 2001 entitled Pink Bollworm Eradication, a Window of Opportunity. 3 years ago, the pest was eradicated in the United States cotton belt, and in the fall of 2018 declared officially eradicated by the USDA. Now, the tree nut industry has a window of opportunity to keep the Phoenix rearing facility open with federal funding as a bridge to another program we hope will lead to suppression and, like cotton, perhaps lead to eradication of navel orangeworm in the distant future. I began my presentation today with the story of my life experience as a young cotton farmer in the Imperial Valley and how Pinky was building resistance to standard chemistries that were thrown at this pest. Today, 30 years later, I fear we are reading from the same playbook. History is repeating itself. Now pressure is building. We are seeing increased generations of now, and our chemistries appear to be showing resistance. Additionally, we are losing some of our most valuable tools in our arsenal, such as the eventual elimination of chlorpyrifos in 2 years. Governor Newsom and this administration are challenging all of us in agriculture to find a different way of thinking about how we control invasive pests and other insect pressures. Yes, standard chemistries must be part of the various bows we have in our quiver. However, we believe that this sterile insect technology would give us an additional weapon in suppressing navel orangeworm and take pressure off our standard chemistries. If suppression works via mating disruption, farmers will be able to spray less, which will go a long way in preserving beneficial insects and help us to avoid a buildup in resistance. As seen with the pink bollworm, a window of opportunity is closing. Should federal funding not be procured for the 2020 fiscal budget to keep the Phoenix rearing facility open, then we are told that the facility will be closed. And it is estimated that it would take $100 million to build a new facility that duplicates the functionality of the Phoenix site. It is questionable that a new facility would be relicensed due to the irradiator needed to achieve sterility and the politics surrounding radioactive material. Today, we request that the CDFA board send a letter to Governor Newsom and directed as well to Secretary Ross, expressing support for the funding of the Center for Plant Health Science and Technology in Phoenix, and thereby the rearing of sterile navel orangeworm moths for application within the San Joaquin Valley in fiscal year 2020. It is highly important that we seek this help in reaching out to our California congressional delegation in providing the support of $21 million in federal funding specifically for this program. In closing, I would like to acknowledge the contribution and financial support from the California Pistachio Research Board and the pistachio industry, who have kept this project viable for 2 years. And I would also like to recognize the work of Roger Ison, the President and CEO of Western Agricultural Processors Association, or WAPA. WAPA has worked diligently to bring the tree nut industry together on this venture from the beginning. WAPA has spearheaded efforts in raising awareness about the rearing facility in Phoenix and its potential for California tree nut growers to work collectively to prevent its possible closure. I currently serve as the chairman of WAPA, and I could not be prouder to be involved on this important project. We are working collaboratively with the Almond Board of California, who has put up substantial funding, as well as the American Pistachio Growers and the Almond Alliance, who have worked on the effort to secure federal funding. All have done a fine job on this and other matters on behalf of the tree nut industry. Thank you very much for this distinct honor to speak with you about this important technology and what it can offer the tree nut growers and the people of California. Thank you very much. I do have some, I don't know how I'm doing on time, Josh, but I do have some images that I can go through fairly quickly.
Sure.
Quick question. Is the navel orangeworm a federally actionable pest?
Not at this time. It has not been specifically named. So that would be one of the asks in the future that would have to be done, just like the pink bollworm was.
Could you review just a minute the $1.04 billion relationship to the Phoenix facility?
Yeah, so that funding appropriation that was approved about 12 days ago at the subcommittee level is what APHIS requires nationally and internationally to carry on their programs. So that $1.04 billion, of course, the 21 million is just, would be a small subset of that, just as it was with the pink bollworm program in the past.
Do we have anyone on that subcommittee from California?
At this time, we have been going out with Senator Feinstein had carried the letter, and one of the congressional delegations that sits on the committee in Georgia, and I'm sorry, I'm missing his name right now. Yes. Stanford Bishop. He was the one that made the appropriations request.
We need to get on our legislators to get on these committees.
Yes. Especially our congressional.
Especially the money committees.
Yeah. Yeah. I reached out to Barbara Lee and TJ Cox, that's in our area, at a meeting that we had in Hanford the other day, and they were very, very receptive. So the wheels are working. But thank you for the question. This is the pest naval orangeworm. I'm going to blow through these really quick. Here's what our friend.
You'd think is it a pest of the navel orange as well?
You know, it's not. It's a vector to host the pest, but it's actually not a pest of the citrus industry. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. This is the larval stage. This is the damage that you can see that is caused. And if you looked at the molds in there, you'd find a myriad of things, but especially aflatoxin. This is the rearing facility, and this is one room, and it's very hard to capture this, but within these containers, the larvae are being produced. And it's almost like something out of a James Bond movie. But each one of these rooms are repetitive. This is just not one room where this is going on. This is a very, very large facility. And once again, each one of these trays has larvae that is coming out and will eventually turn into a moth. And those moths will lay eggs. Here's another picture of the larval stage. Now, when the moths, and remember the moths go out and are spread on the fields in California. So the moths are basically sucked out with a pneumatic system, and they go into this depository where they're set into these trays that'll basically be put onto. So here are the trays here. And you see this tray here? Those are actually navel orangeworm moths. The room is very, very cold. And when it's cold, the navel orangeworm moths become inactive. They just sit there. This is 10,000 navel orangeworm moths. So last year we were propagating each day 6 million navel orangeworm moths. Next year we want to do 30 million a day. And then they're put into these canisters, and this canister, each one of those little openings has a device that's put in there that is a very, very cold, it's a cold pack. And that keeps the moths frozen until they are emitted out by the plane when it reaches California and spread onto the fields, and then they become active. And then these are the boxes that are taken to the airport in Phoenix. It's put on an American Airlines flight, transported over to Bakersfield via Los Angeles, and then offloaded and then taken to a field there where they're loaded on a Cessna 172, I believe is the plane. And this plane has a device that allows them to emit the navel orangeworm moths onto the field.
So Mike, what is the release? So like MedFly we release almost every day in terms of for sterile insects. So what's the release for
It would be every day.
every day?
Yeah, yeah. If we get that funding level.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Mike, how many acres are you covering currently, and where do you want to go with this, and what's it going to take in the future?
Yeah, so thank you. The last couple of years, the wonderful company had volunteered some acreage that they had in Lost Hills. And basically, they're the only game in town in that area, so it was a perfect environment to see how the operations would work and see if the naval orange worm could be dropped and what the levels of mortality would be. That work is done. So now the approach is to go into that same area again to ramp up the program in 2020, go to other areas that are adjacent to those areas, like for instance, along the I-5 corridor, and then continue to expand the program from there based on success. There's still a lot of investigation that needs to be done to make sure that it is going to be a viable technology.
Yeah, Mr. Kelly, what have you assessed with regard to the confluence of a successful program and the reduction of the toxic pesticide footprint? Like, what does this?
What does success mean?
Yeah, what does it mean in terms of the reduction or the reliance on just, conventional pesticide for control and eradication?
So as I talked about in my speech, one of the things that I fear is resistance buildup, and then we start losing more and more of our chemistries. And, but certainly one of the evaluation points is if we do see suppression, and I have a great hope that we will, does that allow us to go from what was 4 to 5 applications last year down to 1 or 2? And so that has to, there is no goal. That's the great unknown. So hopefully over the next 2-year period, that'll be defined.
Thank you, Michael. What a very interesting presentation, and congratulations on the pink bollworm eradication. Yeah. And is that something you think that can be held fast? That it's gone and it'll stay gone and it'll never come back, or would you want to keep this facility open just in case there was a reoccurrence? But that's not the point today. The point today is you need that funding, and that funding you need is 21 million.
Yes.
And you would be looking for support for us.
Yes.
This facility is a publicly funded facility. Could it be taken over privately by grower groups and run by grower groups, or is it's a publicly owned and funded organization, and that's really the only choice, is to keep it public and keep it open as a public and keep APHIS and kind of the cooperators going, or would if they can't get the funding, could it be something taken over by industry?
You know, alternatives could be looked at, but one of the good things about the ask and the success of the pink bollworm program is that we need to have a steady flow of money that's not subject to budgetary constraints. Now, I will tell you on a go-forward basis, the pink bollworm program was actually funded by the growers. And so what do we get to that point at some point? That's has been talked about, but we need to make sure that the technology is viable at this point. But if we can prove suppression at some point, there may be an ask in the future for a program that would be funded by growers.
I support the concept, the idea, the point you made to say this is sustainability. It is. It's an alternative to chemistry, which is, and it works.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just back to the 21 million, is that an annual allocation?
That would be. That's about what it costs to carry on the pink bollworm program. There is about 40 people that work down at the facility in Phoenix right now, and it fluctuates. Most of those are scientists that work for the the Arizona Department of Agriculture. And then also I want to give a shout out, there are a lot of researchers that are here in California that are also funded through the program by CDFA with the Pink Bullworm program. And so monitoring, counting traps, that will have to be a part of this as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, thank you for coming and sharing that with us. It's pretty, be great if this thing takes off and we can reduce our pesticide use on almonds.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, Jim Houston.
Jim who?
Yeah. Oh, pardon me, Jim, I've got to apologize because I've done it twice now. But we wanted to open up for public comment for just a moment. And apologize for not doing it after our water, State Water Board guest, Joaquin Esquivel. Go ahead.
Now, Coach?
You're on.
Hi, Robert Gore. For the past 5 years, I've had the pleasure to help lead the ag lands, irrigated lands stakeholders for the Water Board. And very briefly, Joaquin is correct. There are terrible complexities, and we are managing together. The Water Board stakeholders meet on Tuesday. We've been informed by staff that the water rights permits will be going up 16 to 23%, and irrigated lands, ag lands, will go up 11.4%. For ag lands, this is after increases the last 2 years of 16 and 9%, respectively. The links are public on the Water Board site now. It's like herding angry badgers to get ag land stakeholders to agree on anything. So there is some disagreement about how to proceed, but overall, what we are working for is a collaborative arrangement where instead of being told we get fee increases, to work to organize how we spend our money together in advance. We've spoken to Joaquin about this, and we're transitioning to that sort of a concept in order to put a stake in the ground and find out where our fees have gone over the last decade and establish metrics. We will, at the end of the month, ask the Joint Legislative Audit Committee to do an audit of all the fees and water quality and water rights fees and how they've been spent. For example, at a staff meeting last week, I was told there was an assumption that the ag lands acreage would increase from 6.8 million to 8 million acres, thus reducing the cost because there's more acreage. Except for when I asked them, they hadn't accounted for sigma fallowing. Oops. So we need to make sure we participate on a continuing basis. Two other things very quickly. Central Valley Salts, I'm on the executive committee, which is a model for coalition participation. We'll have a workshop before the state board on July 2nd. This is vital that it get approved. Also, we have met twice in the last 3 weeks with Secretary Crowfoot and Director Namath about the water resiliency portfolio. So the ag land stakeholders do have a voice, and we appreciate your support as we continue this integration. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that, and apologize for not getting in earlier. My oversight. All right, we will now move on to Jim Houston. Jim is with the California Farm Bureau Federation. Jim became administrator of the California Farm Bureau Federation in April 2019. Houston joined CFBF in October 2017 as manager of its Governmental Affairs Division. In January 2018, he assumed the additional duties of managing CFBF Legal Services Division and also serving as the organization's administrative counsel. Earlier, Houston served at the California Department of Food and Agriculture as Deputy Secretary for Legislation and Public Engagement, then as Department Undersecretary. His career also includes work as a legislative staff member for a Sacramento advocacy firm that represented agricultural clients. So, Jim, good to see you.
Thank you, thank you. Good to see many of you. I've sat on that table before, so good to see you. And then there's some new folks here as well, so welcome. This is a special group and a unique opportunity that leaders have to come to Sacramento and give voice to the governor and give advice along with the secretary. I appreciate Don's introduction. I have to say that I would like to get the dates for the moth release because my wife is going to want to avoid Bakersfield, right? She is terrified of moths. I just thought that was funny. Anyway, but I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to y'all. This issue about, I don't even know what adjective to describe the paradigm between rural and urban. Is it a conflict? I think that's what we talk about it, a lot, but I don't think that's a particularly productive way to frame it. I think a disconnect maybe, but it's certainly a challenge that we find ourselves in and y'all find yourselves dealing with every day, which is how do we effectively communicate and connect with our consumers in urban areas, primarily in urban areas. And I think one of the things that is really interesting is that we are both reliant on one another. It is a symbiotic relationship, right? They are our customers, right? We want them to purchase our goods, and they need us. The reason that you're able to live in San Francisco or Monterey or LA, the reason that you can, the reason I can be administrator of Farm Bureau, the reason my wife can be an attorney, the reason my mom can be a school teacher is because there are people that are farming. It just at its fundamental core, there are people that are farming. And, when I would talk a lot, when I was at the Department of Food and Agriculture, I would talk about eating a lot, right? Obviously, Farm to Fork, I don't know if you've noticed, Secretary Ross, kind of a leader in that area. And I would often talk about the difference between growing up and eating. And when I was growing up, eating was healthy. Okay, there was no concept of, maybe there's some, but we were eating, canned peaches, canned green beans, frozen stuff. Access to fresh fruits and vegetables, even in Clovis, California, was somewhat limited. I don't know by infrastructure or what, maybe it's just culture, awareness, whatever. The consumer trends were different. Now I have a 6 and an 8-year-old, and I get to feed them, my wife and I obviously together, and it's really a blessing because we have so many choices. We go to the farmer's market, we go to Nugget, we go to Bel Air, we go to Costco, but there are just there's almost too many choices in terms of what to buy my kids. But I do know that it's better than what I ate. It's healthier for them. The government system that regulates its safety is tremendously more robust, and that is just a real blessing that I have as a parent, and really all parents have right now in the United States, in large parts of the world, but for me personally here in Sacramento, and I don't want to take that for granted, right? But there is sort of this disconnect that we talk about, right? And in some sense, like I said, I have kids, I'm reading them, the Country Mouse, City Mouse, right? One of the cool things about kids, I hope, is the stuff that resonates with children, in some sense, is time immemorial, right? And so I'm able to read them, stuff that I read as a kid or my parents read as a kid. And City Mouse, Country Mouse is one of those sort of lines that we have, right? And it's a fun, great little story about sort of the juxtaposition between rural and urban values. But it's all with a vein of appreciation for both sides. City Mouse and Country Mouse are not fighting. They're getting along. And they're appreciating the values that each other brings, right? And then I was thinking about, we were just talking about it the other day with my family, it was Green Acres, right? This sort of paradigm of coming to the city, but once again, it's fun, it's entertaining, in some sense, it's free of judgment. That was, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And I think what's happened is that those emerged from a pop culture that still had appreciation for agriculture and for farming, even though there was large migrations to the cities. There was much more people entering the workforce, right? And that was just the beginning. And now we are at, in some sense, the zenith or the apex of that. Rates of of people working, of going to college is astronomical compared to what it was when I was a child. And that has a dramatic impact on their ability to understand what is happening in rural California. And I think one of the things that we have a tendency to fall into is to blame people now. Maybe it's that attenuation of generations, it's become too far removed, but we have a tendency to blame urban people. What the heck is wrong with them? You know, your food doesn't come from a refrigerator or a grocery store. How do you not know these things? And I think that is a mistake because it's not their fault. Right? I mean, it's not, you know, they're growing up in whatever environment they grew up in, whether that's a loft or a house in the East Bay or unfortunate low-income conditions that exist in California, right, in urban cities. But at no point in time is there, a reason for them to go and scratch that surface and figure out what really is going on and what are those complexities. You know, I hear about pesticides and that they're bad, but I'm really going to dive in and figure out all the complexities of pesticide decision making in California. That's an unrealistic expectation to have of urban consumers. And the fact that they don't live up to that, we make a mistake if we get angry about that. What we should see that is as a challenge, as an opportunity, and how do we get in there and educate and connect with them and help them, understand those things. Now, the other thing, and this is a bit timely, I guess, is there is a bad side to this. Okay. Yesterday, we saw, I'm sure folks heard about, there are 500 protesters that went up to a duck farm in Petaluma. They broke in, they stole ducks. They chained themselves to the processing conveyor belt. They laid down on the processing conveyor belt. They were arrested, 98 people, and they were on the radio this morning, and if you heard them, they did nothing wrong. Their view of animal agriculture is completely disconnected from the real world. It just is. I know we don't like to say that a lot, but the fact is that it is. That they're even on their website. What they want, literally, is for vigilante justice. They want you, any person, to have the right to go in, unannounced, to any farm and take action for whatever they view as should be the animal standards. This is an untenable position, obviously. And if you talk to people here in Sacramento, I don't think many of them would say, yes, that's a legitimate policy proposal that we should implement here in California. But there is some understanding, there is some reluctance, I guess, but there is some sympathy or empathy that they have with those people. Because those people are striking at a core for some people in urban area that struggle with animal agriculture, right? And so what's likely to happen, or in another situation would happen, Tanya Tosconi from the Sonoma County Farm Bureau was on there afterwards, and she was, she was wonderful. She was reasonable, she was thoughtful, she was understanding, she was empathetic. She didn't, give away the farm or anything, but, she was trying to be what I think we all in agriculture, at least, most of us, are trying to understand the urban perspective and try to have that connection. What concerns me is that these situations always have a tendency in policy to result in a compromise that is always one-directional. And so what I coined today is I think agriculture and rural California, in some sense, have a half-life, right? I don't know if folks understand what the concept of half-life is, but basically, a radioactive material emits, it basically reduces its size in half at a particular interval, right? It's giving off radiation, and so it's what's called the half-life. And what that means is it's a linear progression towards reduction that never ends. And when we look at what is happening with agriculture in California, that is one of the things that concerns me, is that we have this half-life, that the trends are all in one direction, that they are towards higher barriers to entry, towards more regulation, towards lower margins, towards less labor and less water. And I don't mean to like bemoan that. I'm not here to, but I mean, that is just the reality. I mean, if you just take a step back, I'm a big baseball fan, analytics. If you just look at the analytics, that's the trend line. And there are consequences to that. There are benefits to that. I mean, I think, the environment is better off. Food is safer. But the consequences is that it's much, much harder to start a farm today. It's much, much harder to be a small farmer today than it used to be. And yet we have a consumer population that wants small farming. And so, this is it, right? Like, this is the crux of the thing that we all struggle with. How do we break that sort of logjam and connect the wires? And it's my belief that you need a lot of things. You need to be engaged, obviously, which I think we are. And we at the Farm Bureau, I'm really, really excited about some of the stuff that we're going to be doing under Jamie Johansson's leadership in terms of connecting with consumers and engaging with people to help them better understand agriculture and the challenges that we face. I don't mean challenges but you go out and something happens, you got to fix it. That's what happens. So sort of those complexities. But you also need structural help. So, the natural tendency of demographics, of human, existence, is one that tends towards more people in urban populations, right? I mean, we look at that, any country, anywhere in the history of the world, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see agrarian switching to urban. And what happens there then is all of those urban people go back to the beginning of the talk, right? Now you've got this huge population of people that doesn't know anything, and they're 3 generations removed from the farm. When you're 1 generation removed from the farm, you're probably okay. 2 generations, I don't know. 3 generations, you've probably forgotten everything, And so they're now making decisions. They're electing representatives. They are the population's base. And there's nothing that we can do about that. So it reminded me of, these things that my parents used to have on the wall. And so my dad had, maybe some of yours did, what part of no don't you understand? They had that framed. And my mom had the serenity prayer, right? Right, which is God, what is it? God grant me the wisdom to know the things I can change, the courage to change, or no, God grant me something to know the things I can't, the knowledge to know the things I change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay. But basically, it's about thinking about what you can control, what you can't control. And you can't control people, right? I can't force urban consumers to like agriculture or to learn about agriculture. I can try and engage them. I can try. But at the end of the day, people are people. So what we do is we put in structural things that help. Farm Bill is one of them, right? The bicameral legislature in the United States Senate is one of them. Like it or not, that was the intent, was to balance out the majority rule versus the minority rule. And that's why they gave the Senate the representation that it did. And in Reynolds versus Sims, they used to have that in California, and Reynolds versus Sims, the United States Supreme Court threw it out. I'm not here to argue the constitutionality of that, but the result is that we are going to have continued increase in city populations, and the imbalance is only going to grow. So, sorry, long-winded, but what do? We need structural help. So we are trying to start, Farm Bureau, very small, and building off of the experience that we have had working with government and here at the Department of Food and Agriculture and personally, which is to get a rural economic advisor here. And it's AB 417 by Mr. Arambula. It's going through the legislature right now. But basically that is the idea. And I didn't ask Bob to come up here and say that, but he was very timely in that the focus of this primarily was Sigma, right? Like the whole point, in some sense, there's going to be things, there are things beyond Sigma, there's going to be things beyond Sigma, but Sigma was the thing that kind of came up and slapped you in the face and said, oh my God, what are we going to do? It's not that we're going to undo Sigma or that Sigma wasn't, time had come, right? But there is going to be a reckoning in the Central Valley. There is going to be fallowing. And what are we going to do for those people? For the workers, for the employees, for the families? What are we going to do? Well, the first thing we should do is figure out what's going to happen, to study it, to look at it, to go to Delano, to Orosi, right, to Pixley, and ask those people and look at it and study it and figure it out. What are going to be the trends? Where the investments need to be made? Workforce education, right? Training, job opportunities, investments. How are we going to help these communities survive? Because the answer should not be you have to pack up and go to LA or San Francisco. Good luck to you. And I don't mean to be, judgmental, I guess, but it's hard for me to reconcile the fact that we as a state spend millions and millions and millions and millions, billions of dollars planning on all sorts of things for urban areas. But we haven't spent a dime on Sigma. Not a dime. We're gonna fallow 1 million acres in the Central Valley, and we have not spent a dime figuring this out. And the plans are due January 2020. So I don't mean to be, dramatic, but I am, certainly passionate, I guess, about these things. And I think that it's not a hard problem to solve. Let's get, somebody here at the department whose job it is to look at the facts, to look at the science, to look at the economics, and understand what are strategies that the state can do to help mitigate these impacts, like we do in all sorts of areas all across the state. And I think little things like that will help, because at the very least, it will give these communities a voice. It will give them personal attention that they very much deserve. And the other thing is, and I think, Joy, you brought it up earlier, broadband, right? So I've been doing this, right, for 20 years, but at least for 10, I've heard about broadband and how we need to get broadband. And we work with the fairs and try to get broadband. Karen and I met with the High-Speed Rail Authority back in its infancy, right, and try to get broadband. How can we dovetail these things? I mean, we're turning over every stone trying to get broadband into rural areas. I mean, I don't have to convince you why it's needed. I mean, it's critical. It's a catalyst for economic support for these areas. You want to mitigate the impacts of Sigma? Maybe broadband will help. Maybe that'll give job opportunities to people who don't want to live in LA or San Francisco, but like to live, outside, in the country. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I think my point is we have to find ways to have courage at the state level, to make investments, to isolate the problems and tackle those specific problems. I think we have a tendency to just broadband. Wow, it's so big. I don't know. No, they're very specific. Let's start with this place, that town. Can we get broadband there? Right? And if we can get broadband there, can we get it there? And let's start knocking off the list. On the AB 417, can we just start there? Can we start with Sigma? Can we start with an economic multiplier? The county ag commissioners. Let's not let the famous saying about how to eat an elephant. One bite at a time, right? I mean that's the best hope we got. And I think that it's not just something that rural people need. I mean maybe people think that, but this is something that urban people need as well. It is a symbiotic relationship, and they may not know it yet. But if rural California and the agricultural bounty that it provides, goes away, we will not recognize California, and that would be a very, very sad day. So anyway, I've talked, I'm sure, way too long, but I appreciate you listening to me, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. We'll go ahead and open it up. The woman with the B, go ahead.
Actually, I'm not going to mention the B word. I think because you already said it all. So thank you for that. My question is, CDFA is already dedicated to rural and to agriculture. So I'm wondering if having another layer in that agency is worthwhile. Perhaps more importantly or effectively would be in the governor's office.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question, and I'll just be honest. From my experience, and God bless the governor's office, but CDF. Sorry, CDFA as an agency, as just a structural entity, I think has advantages. The governor's office has a tendency to be a little bit nebulous in terms of roles and responsibilities. This is not a judgmental thing. This is just all governor's offices, just the structure of how executive offices function. There are institutional advantages that come with the department. The mission and vision of the department are very specific to agriculture, and it helps them, I think, in some sense, have access to agricultural decision makers that they might be a little bit more reluctant in the governor's office. They're going to have to balance lots of things. They're just physically. They're in the horseshoe or something, right? And so you're surrounded by other people who have different charges and different missions. And at least at the Department of Food and Agriculture, everyone has a sort of common mission. And I think the intent is for this person to have a lens that is focused on rural California and agriculture. And ensconcing them here at the department gives them, I think, a platform and leverage that we otherwise wouldn't get.
Yeah, and Joy, if I could add to that, if you ask Resources Agency, they say they're dedicated to rural California, because not all rural counties or rural areas are exactly the same. Some are dominated by forestry. What we all have in common is we're dominated by being a natural resource dependent economic driver. And so I think what Jim is proposing here is rural California, where agriculture is the dominant economic driver, and the forces that are creating change to allow us to look at beyond just agriculture and the activities of farming as the driver, but that with SGMA coming at us, what do we do to save infrastructure? What do we do to make sure there's still quality education? What do we do to make sure there's workforce training? And without just being a go-biz that is about, well, we'll just diversify the economic base here and agriculture may be a lot less. It's still allowing us, the way I listen to Jim, it's still allowing us that ag is still a dominant, relevant economic driver that can do all these other things in an integrated system. So John Laird and I used to fight, and then Ana Caballero, we used to fight over who's really the voice for rural California. So I just want to make sure that we understand there are some differences in rural California. But we all need broadband.
Yes. Just a short comment, being the lone person from the school lunch food program aspect of it, yay! And this is definitely not the panacea to what's going on with California agriculture and understanding it. But I just want to highlight, when you're talking about starting small and starting little, these farm to preschool programs are amazing. I mean, we've had a 4-year-old that when they saw a banana, they asked, "Where's the sticker on the banana?" because they're just so used to seeing everything coming directly from the store. So I just wanted to highlight that and the efforts that, the UC Cooperative Extensions, I know they're getting reduction in a lot of their work, but there's just a lot of work that's happening in the urban areas, and I'm in Los Angeles, around, educating our young ones about what's agriculture and farm.
Yeah, thank you for that. I really appreciate that comment. Because it is something that, I think we've spent some time on, but with little kids, it really is a great opportunity. And I have to share, so my son, James, really likes strawberries, Chris. And there is a farm, you may know them, maybe they're members, V&M Farms in Santa Cruz, Watsonville, right? Santa Cruz County, Watsonville. And they have booths at the Sunday Farmers Market here and Tuesday Farmers Market there. And I promise you, there is a literal percentage. Like if you broke my son down into his constituents, he's like 5% V&M Strawberry Farms, my point is that we are literally growing the things that our children are made out of. Okay? They're eating those things and they're growing muscles and they're growing, right? They're using the food that we give them to grow. And that's a really powerful opportunity, I think, that we have to connect with consumers on that level. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much for your talk. Lots of food for thought. Really appreciate it. When I couldn't agree with you more about the symbiotic relationship between rural communities and urban communities. I too have young kids who've kind of redefined food and how we eat. Well, my kids aren't so young anymore. Sorry, they're actually now teenagers. So, but I have a question for you when you think about what it means to pay attention to rural communities, because you're exactly right that we constantly see the movement of people from rural areas to urban areas. But if you ask a lot of those people, did they want to make that move? The answer is no.
Right, yeah.
And, one of the challenges we have is that I think a lot of people in those urban areas would like to see more of the small farms. They'd like to understand more, they'd like to know the farmers. They'd like to have an actual relationship. But the way the industry is moving now is towards larger and larger farms. Yep. And people who are farm workers who, let's be honest, the only difference between a farmer and a farm worker is access to capital and land, don't have access to capital or land. Yep. So I'm just curious whether that is part of what you mean when you say rethinking these assumptions we have about rural and urban, and what you think we could do about beginning to tackle that problem.
First of all, coming in here, as I was thinking about, what to say, that was kind of one of the things that I meant to say is, when people go from rural to urban, they're forced to. It's generally not elective. There's always one, but generally, people go because there's not opportunity where they're at. And so, yes, in some sense, I think that's what people don't understand is sort of the evolution and these barriers. Because when I talk to folks, and I mean it, with all sincerity, we, the farmers now, right, who own farms or operate farms now, 1, 2, 3, 4 generations, 5 generations ago, somewhere down their line, there was somebody who was just like the person who is living, in crappy conditions in Salinas right now. I'll never forget George Altamira, in Napa, slept in a chicken coop, right, and worked his way. Now, apparently, I believe him. But the point is that there are all of these people who were able to make the sacrifice, come here, work hard. We talk about the American dream. You can't do that anymore. It's really, really, really hard to work hard, save us some money, buy a plot of land, put some stuff in the ground, and grow from there. Those barriers to entry are just too high. And so, what do we do? I think you have to recognize, or we have to come to grips, honestly, with small farms and the regulatory environment that surrounds them. We have to be willing to do one or the other, right? We either need to lessen the regulatory burden on small farms, or we need to provide money to help them comply with the permits and regulations. Neither of those things are without controversy, but I don't, just looking at it and being intellectually honest, I don't see how you go any other direction, because we're not going to erode the outcomes. And I think, we talk about regulations, but regulations are trying to achieve an outcome, right, of some sort of environmental or health consequence is trying to be avoided. And so, how do we work with small farms so that they can be profitable, so that they can, invest in the practices that are necessary? And I think there has to just be a willingness on the part of the state, which is the consumer, as well, to invest in those things.
Well, Jim, I appreciate all your information today, and good to see you again here in front of the board. You're always welcome to. We're going to go ahead and break for lunch. Speakers, you're welcome to join us around the room on the left, and we want to get started at 12:45. So,
Don, can I just mention that was some passion from Jim there, wasn't it?
Well, I agree.
Son of a gun, coming in with guns blazing.
No, I agree with you, and I appreciate that, Jim. We know that it's a very complex situation, and it's hard to find the right answer. I agree. There's the demise of the smaller farm for a lot of reasons, economic and regulatory issues that we face every day. And not only small farms going away, but you're seeing larger farms disappearing as well. The people are getting out. And right, somebody is always there to farm the land. But anyway, thank you. Appreciate you coming in. Jim, so you didn't, what was the ask? Yes, sorry.
Sorry.
That was very
If
true.
the State Board of Food and Ag, in all of its wisdom, could see fit to support the AB 417, hey, she's still
was
to
it
this day teaching me.
417?
AB 417, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joaquin Arambula.
Jim, my wife called the Union Square Hilton her chicken. No.